My name is Adam Arredondo, Adamarredondo.
Excellent. Now, I'll be kind of going back and forth. Pretend I'm always here.
Yep.
Don't follow me. So where do you live, and have you always lived here?
Yeah, I live in Kansas City, Missouri. I've always largely lived in Kansas City. Grew up on the north side of town. Just spent a few years college in the region, and then spent a year traveling for work a little bit. Spent about a half a year out in Ohio, but otherwise Kansas City.
What would you miss most if you had to leave Kansas City tomorrow?
The community. The part I miss most about Kansas City is definitely the community. I like that it's a small town in the sense of you always have small world connections. But I feel like it's a big enough city to where you some of the real world, the bigger dynamic challenges of our world are present here. So, and being a community builder, I love the ability to, again, to reach the key decision makers and the like, but also be able to face some of the hardest challenges of our society.
So, how do you earn your livelihood? What do you do?
So, I'm the CEO of Startland. We're a 501c3. It goes back to the Kansas City Startup Village, first neighborhood that got Google Fiber, and really just what ignited my passion to build Kansas City into a more entrepreneurial city, just in the sense of not starting businesses, but just dreaming big and solving problems. Kansas City, in the Midwest, more conservative, corporate, traditional city, and I think a lot of the challenges we face is because we aren't more entrepreneurial in the sense of like seeing problems as an opportunity to solve and an opportunity to create change as opposed to something we have to live within. So, so we, Startland is an organization that's built to make Kansas City more entrepreneurial and more creative and more confident in our ability to solve our problems.
So what is it that Startland does to achieve that?
Yeah, so we say our mission is to build a thriving, inclusive culture of innovation in Kansas City. We do that through storytelling. So we have a publication called Startland News that we have about to have 3 full-time journalists, reporters that just tell stories about entrepreneurs and creators. We do a lot of work in education. Growing up here, it was not really celebrated or encouraged to innovate, to be an entrepreneur, to, as more of kind of march to the beat, and success was having a predictable, stable job. But how do we instill the people's ability to dream big and be risk takers, whether it is as an entrepreneur or just as a kind of a problem solver within whatever field they're in. So we do a lot of work with students and now training teachers to teach more real world learning and design thinking in school. We do a lot of work with students to give them that experience as well. And then finally, we do a lot of community events to really just build the network of people that are connected to innovation, entrepreneurship, and creativity in Kansas City to kind of change that consciousness of, again, seeing success as not only having a stable job, but also creating change and being a part of the change that you want to see.
So in one or two words, how would you describe the year 2020? And then why did you choose those 1 or 2 words?
2020, 2 words, inflection point. Being where we are today, I think both politically, obviously the election coming up, with the pandemic, what is the future going to look like is very much going to be an inflection point in history in terms of how we interact with each other and how we, what our world looks like moving forward. And when it comes to race, it's an inflection point. For obvious reasons with George Floyd and everything that's happening there. So I think 2020, we didn't know it coming in completely, but I think we know it now is forever going to change the trajectory of our community, of our country, and of our world.
So describe the moment COVID-19 became real to you, and what were the emotions going through you at that moment?
The moment COVID became real, so I think The point at I think I remember starting to take it more seriously, and it became real to me, was that nursing home outbreak in Washington State, and hearing how devastating it was. And then during when that story was coming out, you kept hearing cases pop up further and further, and it was that mid-March maybe when that was happening, maybe beginning of March. And then there'd be a case in New York, there'd be a case in California. Now there's 5 cases in New York now. And I think it was to me when it started hitting home. Again, we heard about it in China, but I think it's easy to be like, that's not going to affect us. But I think it was that nursing home outbreak in Washington State where it started being like, oh, this isn't good.
How did that impact you emotionally?
Well, I mean, I had a grandma in a nursing home at the time, and my wife's grandma, both very high risk. And so, I mean, to me, thinking about them, and I think back then it was still very, very widely thought that it didn't affect young people. So it wasn't something I was necessarily scared of, but starting to worry about the elderly. Obviously now it's, it's much beyond that. But at the time it was just kind of worrying about those vulnerable, and just starting to already see at the time how it was being politicized, and just kind of disappointed at where the state of our politics are, and how much worse off we are because of that.
So how did your daily life change at first?
Once quarantine hit, how did it start changing? So, I mean, we all worked in the office at that time, and then kind of we quickly went remote. So I think socially is the big part. We were able to, we have a really innovative, creative team, and we're not the type of company that we're like, woe is us, this sucks, but how do we shine in a tough time? I mean, one of our teammates, I think, framed it really well. She's like, I think the question we need to be asking ourselves is, how are we going to be remembered during this time? Not how are we going to survive? And I think that really framed our approach. So work-wise, we were able to shift really quickly to just saying, all right, how do we make the most, and how do we have the same impact in a virtual world that we were having before? And so that it's been really cool to see our team really come to life. Socially was tough. My wife was 3 months pregnant, or in the 3rd trimester at the time. So 6 months pregnant. We had our kid June 11th. So, her full 3rd trimester was in quarantine, which, is unique in that it gave us some really quality time to be a couple, and we went on walks every day. And that I found a lot of value in. So that was a unique situation for me, but I'm a highly social person, and so just feeling disconnected was tough, and not being around family, which I'm really close to. But I also seem to be a bit unique in the sense that Zoom, I still felt a connection with people, where so many people felt like it being on a screen eliminated that connection. So it didn't hit me nearly as hard as my wife, for example, who's a campus minister, in those personal in-person interactions with students are like what she lives for. And she really struggled. So I saw that firsthand. But for me, again, I just shifted to how do we make the most of this moment. And I'm really proud of what our team was able to accomplish.
So have you found some new habits or routines that have emerged because of the pandemic?
Wiping down all groceries, Yeah, so no, I absolutely think what I love, I mean, our team was pretty tech connected already. We did Zooms and different things, not at the level we do, but I think just the level at which people are more comfortable now connecting digitally and via video calls, it makes us more connected in a way. Obviously, we don't want to lose that in person, but I think that's really good. I also think it has forced small businesses to really quickly get more digitally connected, which I think will serve them well in the long run, to be able to offer carry out and have robust online ordering and these different things that big corporations had and chains did that small businesses largely didn't. I think that'll help them compete beyond. Now, we're obviously losing a lot of small business now. So I think that, and also just my habits around, we do online grocery ordering now and these different things. So I think it's that balance of what are the things we're doing digitally now that are super convenient, but then how do we also support, where the more national brands and chains are the ones that are doing that exceptionally well, Amazon for an example, but that often is at the expense of small local business. So I think that's kind of it, but I definitely have seen more of a gravity towards using the internet to buy and purchase things as well as interact with people, obviously. And I think that when we learn to fuse that kind of a hybrid of what we've learned to do virtually, and for many of those that weren't comfortable before, fuse that with analog in the future, I think will be a powerful combination.
So what are the things that you've had to do with your team to help them get through this transition and disruption?
I think when you're not in person, it's easy to get siloed. And so we've had to try and be really intentional we've added more team Zoom calls just so we can see each other. So we used to just have one team meeting a week. Now we have 2 plus a virtual happy hour. Because a lot more happened organically in the office. Our management meetings we now do twice a week. We used to only do that like once or twice a month because, again, a lot more happened organically, and just to hear where people are at. And it's as much about social connectivity and maintaining some camaraderie as it is tactical. Because, again, it's really easy with 2 departments that don't, that's work doesn't overlap a lot, but would see each other a lot in the office, now wouldn't see each other at all a lot of the time. So we've had to be a lot more intentional on trying to, or creating those opportunities where just as humans, we interface with each other. And I would say that's been the biggest thing, just to maintain that human connection.
So now that we're about 120 days into this, what's life like for you now? How does it feel now?
The hardest part, I also layer having a kid in this, but it's just that, there's a longing for the human connection that you can't get virtually. And just as with this interview, like we didn't shake hands, just those things, just the human touch, human connection, that's tough. Again, like there's a part of me that just from a intellectual part, the Zoom allows for, but the high fives, the hugs, the handshakes, the just sitting close, that's hard. And especially having a kid where you want more than anything for your family and friends to be able to snuggle with your baby.
What's that been like? What was that like? Walk us through having a kid during a pandemic.
Yeah, and again, being a community builder, so much of what we do is about creating that human connection, and that's what I thrive on. That having a kid and she's changed so much in 5-6 weeks now, and we see it every day. And I would love more than anything for my parents who live 20 minutes from here to be able to just see and hold her every couple days, and they would swing by. I know they would, but we limit that. And they also have taken my 90-year-old grandma in because they couldn't, the nursing home she was in couldn't provide the rehab anymore, and she was just deteriorating. So now they have that added care, and so it's just kind of an overall with high risk people, with a baby, with a 90-year-old at my parents' house, just that heightened fear constantly of every interaction being analyzed on is this safe, is tough and wears on you. And especially my wife, who's more of an empathetic person that feels, I feel a lot, but she feels 10 times more than me. In feeling that and having that tension of wanting to be close to people but wanting to be safe is really, really wears on you.
So what's been the biggest challenge for you throughout the pandemic?
I think it is, for me personally, has been the baby dynamic, but I think that again is because that's the most intense situation I have where human connectivity, I would want it most. But I think an extension of that is I've seen multiple people just really struggling with even depression or just isolation. And again, I've been fortunate to where I feel connection through Zoom, but again, seeing my wife where her being the campus minister and her work and her superpower being that one-on-one interpersonal connectivity and seeing how she's struggled. And then for both of us wanting that more than anything with our child. Again, in a lesser degree personally, but as important to our work is, missing those organic interpersonal connections that's networking. That's how you build community. That's how you build trust. And so one thing that is just kind of started to be in conversations over the last month, because I think everyone approached this, okay, we're going to put in our time 2 or 3 months and we'll be back to normal. But now what you're seeing 4 months in is your network isn't growing, right? Because you aren't going to events and meeting new people organically, or at least as quickly through digital. You have to be like, hey, I want to connect you to X. Where in person, you're like, oh, Bo's over here. Stephanie, you need to meet Bo, and you just do it. And so in community building, that's not happening. So I think what we're seeing is the growth of networks is slowed. And so from a connectivity and a community perspective, that trust building is much slower in a virtual environment. And so again, that interpersonal loving part that I'm missing with a kid, but that trust building piece that's essential in community building, again, those are the things that I think, and especially during a time when like race, the best way to move forward there is to build trust-based relationships, and you do that best in person. That doesn't happen as much. So I think those are the parts that are hardest for me, both personally and professionally.
How does this compare to other big challenges? Any other big challenges you had to face?
So I think, from a community building perspective, it's easy to shift content digitally. So that's just a problem to solve, right? Like, that's a business problem. How do we get you this content? So I think, when you're looking to reach a new audience, it's how do you get this content to them, whether it's an in-person event or digital. I think the thing that's different here is you've eliminated an entire mode of interaction, and organic connectivity. So to me, a lot of other things you face with business or with community building is there's tools or approaches, and they're at the full suite of tools is at your disposal, where now it's not. So I think, again, this is unlike any challenge I think most of us have ever faced. And how I often will solve challenges, whether it's interpersonal or community, it's about creating authentic in-person connectivity, and that's eliminated right now. So it's forcing us to say, what is the best way to create authentic connectivity virtually? And I don't think we've figured that out yet.
How do you think your daily life's going to feel like 2 years from now?
I think similar to how air travel changed after 9/11, it was never the same. It was always a heightened sense of awareness of security and safety. I think that's going to be there. I think there's a lot of things we will initiate connection with digitally that we didn't before. But ultimately, I think we'll find the vaccine. I think human nature is to kind of go back to what's comfortable. And so I think a lot of that will go back to restaurants. Maybe there's a little more spacing. I imagine there'll be a lot more hand sanitizing in the future. I think we'll get to the point with post a vaccine, masks won't be a regular thing, but I think masks in high density I think more people will wear masks in high density situations. But again, I think it'll be just a heightened sense of hygiene. And also, I think people will be just more conscious of how their health affects others.
So, in the challenges you see in your work and in your community, what excites you about solving them?
I mean, it's just forcing us to interact with each other in new ways that I get excited about when we do get back to being able to do stuff in the analog world again, the hybrid of that. Because obviously you can't replace a handshake or a high five or a hug. But there's so many opportunities that people can't be a part of because of kids or travel or whatever, that forcing us now to create the best virtual interaction between people and then marrying it to the best in person and creating that where both are possible, where we didn't in the past, I think will expand the reach and connectivity of networking and events and community than ever before. But we're still kind of going through the growing pains of how do we interact best virtually. And then, because I think we're realized now we're not just going to go back to normal. And I think now that we've realized that we're just not going to have 3 months and then whoop, everything's good, is forcing us to really embrace what's the best we can do virtually. And I look forward to the hybrid analog virtual experiences of the future.
We're down to our final four, so.
Yeah.
About 6 weeks ago, we had a whole new eruption of a racial injustice conversation.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to the George Floyd incident? And then how would you describe the Kansas City's community reaction to the conversation that's emerged since?
So my initial reaction, so we had a really big virtual event that week. And I remember, so it happened over Memorial Day weekend. Our event was middle of that week, the next week. And then that Friday night, I was exhausted. I had just wrapped up the event. And I remember saying, I hear this George Floyd stuff. I hadn't taken the time to really read about it. And as a white guy, it really struck me that I had the choice whether to engage or not engage. And I chose to engage. So I stayed up several hours that night to read and kind of see what was going on. And it really struck me the privilege in that choice that I had. So personally, it's been a journey for me. I've been actively pushing myself to be uncomfortable and learn why I'm uncomfortable and how to be part of the solution for years. But I think all of this is pushed even further. And so that's mine, and kind of engaged it. And my family is actually, again, suburban Kansas City family. We've had a few family conversations collectively on what are we all feeling and experiencing, and that's been really powerful, and we've never done that before. But as a city, I think, and I think collectively, Kansas City mirrors a lot of what you've seen across the nation. I mean, obviously Kansas City is more conservative probably than others, but it's just been powerful to see with every subsequent police killing, and this one obviously really ignited a change and a movement, that the more and more white people that I think, because before it started being documented on video, it seemed one-off. So when the first video came, Trayvon Martin or whoever it was a decade-ish ago, it was like it felt one-off, and now we've seen it so many times. And then the blatancy of George Floyd in 9 minutes on his neck with no regard for his life, I think it finally pushed a lot more white people to say, like, I've seen this now enough times, and that is so blatantly racist and wrong and murder that I attended a march here briefly. They actually marched right past my house. It is more white people than not white people, and that's in Kansas City. And I think you've seen that nationally. And so I think it's encouraging to see that, and to see some of the changes that are following. And one of the things in Kansas City that happened within a few weeks is J.C. Nichols was a developer here in town back in the 1920s that was on the Federal Housing Commission and largely made race-based housing covenants a common practice nationally, and a lot of that started in Kansas City. We had a street and a fountain named after him, and those names have already been changed. And again, that's just symbolic, but I think though starting by erasing the celebration of racist history, from honoring it and putting it on a pedestal is, I think, really important. And there's a number of other changes, and I think, again, we are just starting on this reckoning, but it's great to see it happening in some symbolic and literal changes.
So, using one or two words to describe how you feel about the next 5 years, what one or two words would you use?
Optimistic. I debated saying cautiously optimistic, but I'm optimistic. I think, I definitely have thought for a long time. I mean, as healthcare has gotten better, older people are staying in office and in power longer. And the reality is, for example, Trump, he turned 18, or roughly was turning 18, the year that the Civil Rights Act was passed. So there's a whole generation of leaders still in power that became adults in a world where segregation was legal. And so for me, I think we're seeing that tipping point where we're starting to get more people that understand and are willing to confront our racist history and do the things we need to do to begin to address that. So I'm optimistic on that front, but also, I think the pandemic and forcing more and more people to embrace technology instead of resist it, I think is good, because it is a reality. And, I'm just optimistic that more and more people are realizing the importance of voting, and I'm optimistic that more will turn out and put people in office that represent what's good and what, people really want.
So is there a question or a topic that I should have asked or raised that I haven't?
No, I mean, I love these questions. I do think so much of what we're seeing are these generational battles. And I think a lot of it revolves around those that kind of embrace the transparency and connectivity of the world and technology, and understanding that bottom-up leadership is the way that things need to be now. And the fight against what you see in our government is just top-down, ego-driven, and not just talking about Trump, but all around. Versus this true, there's plenty of issues that 70+% of the populace are for that our government can't pass. And I think, a lot of that is, many people that became leaders in a world where you needed to be top down because connectivity wasn't as easy as it is now. And I think as, some of that is just time, and it's not totally age, but it does correlate to age. But as some of that just, there's turnover in leadership, I think more embracing that is good. Now, obviously there's some fairly fatal flaws with our current politics, but I think I just have hope that more good people are going to get into office, good people are going to vote, and that we'll start seeing some change from our politics. And I also see corporations that are taking stronger stances on equity issues, because it hurts their bottom line if they don't. And if that's the motive, fine, but you're seeing some stances there. And I love the reckoning in sports as well.
This is an ad-lib question, but as I think about what you represent, what do you want people to know about the Kansas City startup innovation community?
I think it's still a young community. We've come, really before Google Fiber, we were not on the map, and that was 8 years ago. And in the grand scheme of things, that's small. The Valley's been becoming the Valley for half a century. Austin's been, kind of at it for 20, 25, 30 years, and others, right? So, I think what you see in Kansas City is just really this yearning to embrace a more innovative mindset that isn't always natural in in the Midwest and maybe in Kansas City that is more kind of maybe parochial and corporate in the way it views things. But I think what you'll see here is there's a real groundswell of energy, not only just in the entrepreneurial space, but just in the city as a whole. Growing up here, the Kansas City I knew growing up for the Kansas City today is very different. The energy, the excitement around downtown, around innovation, entrepreneurship, that really was sparked by Google Fiber. But now with the championships, with soccer and Sporting KC in 2013, Royals win World Series in 14 and winning it in 15, and now Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs. That adds another layer of pride and confidence that on top of a more vibrant downtown, a more robust, growing tech and innovation community, and now kind of that civic pride element, there really is momentum here that is now showcasing the culture that most people outside of Kansas City don't know, whether it comes to food or history or music or arts. And so again, I think Kansas City is quickly becoming it has become a city that's surprised a lot of people, and I'm excited to showcase that more and more as we continue to grow.
So my final question is, this is going to be seen on the internet.
Yeah.
Someone is going to see it somewhere at some time, maybe down the road, maybe soon. And we don't know where they are, where they're coming from, and all that stuff. But this is a chance for you to kind of put a message into a time capsule.
Yeah.
If someone's watching this, and watching you right now, what's the message you want to convey to them?
I mean, to me, it's we all have a responsibility and an ability to create change and to play our part. Again, sometimes that's standing up for someone in your company or in your corporate setting. Sometimes that's being an entrepreneur and starting something on your own. But I think far too many people just focus on themselves. But I think we all have a responsibility to protect and support and advocate for those around us in small and big ways. Again, not all of us are going to be community builders or politicians that want to, but in our little way, if you see some injustice, it is our responsibility to stand up for it and to find ways to be brave. And also, take the time to educate yourself. I've really come to think of comfort as the enemy of progress. We have to get uncomfortable at times to learn and to push ourselves. And so if you aren't pushing ourselves in little ways, at least to get uncomfortable, to learn about race, to learn about and stay engaged in the political process, at least in little ways, then you aren't doing your duty as a human, as a neighbor, as a citizen. And I think that is the biggest message, is just do little things to push yourself to get uncomfortable, because I think if we all do that, our community and our society will move forward in a much more positive direction.